Welcome to the National NREIA July COVID-19 update. Today, Charles Tassel will be talking about legislative issues with an update. And we're listening for the Senior Research Fellow and Director of Urbanity Project at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, talking about some very interesting ideas about rezoning and using some of the properties that we're going to talk about that'll come available after what we're calling the commercial apocalypse right now. First of all, we want to start by thanking our broadcast sponsor, the Home Depot Pro team. We have a great relationship with them with special programs for investors. We have, for example, discounts on paint up to 20% at the register. We have rebates and other great National REIA exclusive programs. We also have some other great sponsors that we work with. Just really quickly to go over them, we have everything from insurance services to Rent Perfect, which is an investigative screening company, Equity Trust, that is our IRA provider, IDI, which is an incredible data provider, Office Depot, foreclosures.com, and REI Pro. We also had some great people support us during our mid-year conference that I wanted to say thank you to. But we at National REIA just want to let you know that we have spent over 35 years promoting, protecting, and educating in the industry. We're a nonprofit association serving independent real estate investors and their communities. And we want to say thank you to you for attending today and for being with us. If you have questions about any of the programs that we have, any of our benefits or other programs, or where to find a group so that when we start meeting again, you can join with them. Or if you need resources in your area, you can come to our website and just click here on Find a Local Group. We also have our ongoing COVID-19 updates that are on the site, and we have this as a monthly call. Just a disclaimer, any of the things that we say today or any of the ideas that we give you are just our opinions. And if you have questions that are of a legal nature or a true investment or financial nature, you can consult with an attorney or a CPA in your area for the best advice on that. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Charles Tassel to talk about updates in the legislative arena. Charles, you need to unmute, sir.
All right, how about that? I'm all for the freedom of speech there. So let me just start by saying we've had a couple of things going on. To start with, I've had some questions on late fees, rent increases, great things. There are some folks just praying to get the rent in. So let me address that a little bit and say, be careful. This is one of those, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And this is an area of, with eviction moratoriums going on, rental assistance still leading headlines in some areas. Now is not the time to either reinstitute late fees or to look at rent increases. Now, if you're doing a new rent and it's somebody new coming in the building that might be at a newer price, that's understandable. There's newer costs, there's new expenses. But in general, I would urge you caution on doing that as far as rent increases and late fees or reinstituting late fees. So be cautious to those two things. You don't want to be that person, okay? You don't want to be the person that's covered on the headlines. You don't want to be the person who's, oh, this guy's raising my, we were almost making it except for, okay? So let's not rock that boat yet. And one of the things I'll mention, there's a couple of things going on. I mentioned the rental assistance. There are literally at the local level, the county level, the state level, and even federal level, there's discussion on federal or rental assistance. Again, we have our voter voice piece up. That's one option out there to get out there and just engage your congressman, let them know that rental assistance is important. We talk about it being the first domino. If rents aren't paid, the next set of dominoes, and it's not a single domino, it's a whole set of dominoes fall. As you all know, paying those bills, if those can't be paid, what happens is a huge impact on the housing and financial markets in the country. So we're encouraging that side of it, encourage the rental assistance programs. And some of you will see rental assistance programs being developed at a local level because of CARES money that has been has floated all the way down through to a city or a county. And those CARES funds are targeted. Now, be careful, make sure you read the fine print. because whether it's Miami-Dade County, which has, you know, a 50% clawback, or I should say 50% forgiveness rate. So you can accept their money, but you got to forgive 50% of the rent as well. There are some that are only 10%. There are some that are nothing. There are some that say you can't evict for 2 years if you take this person, you know, you accept this funds. So make sure you read the fine print on what the rental assistance is. And this is one where, as an organization, make sure organizationally you're reaching out and saying, you know what, this program has a problem, this needs to be fixed, or our members are not likely to participate. Get that out there, get it stated. But again, make sure what you put out there is carefully written, and be cautious of your policy. Just say, we've got some very serious concerns about this, we'd like to address them, and get that, and sit down and have that relationship with folks and do that. One of the areas where relationships are also very important is on eviction moratoriums. We are seeing some areas saying all the way, you know, the HEROES Act, which is passed the House and is being dealt with in the Senate right now, is talking about eviction moratoriums all the way through, you know, middle of next year kind of thing, March, April, May. You know, that boggles my mind. I know some lawsuits, there are some lawsuits that have won. There are some lawsuits that are in process on stopping eviction mandates or eviction moratoriums. So pay attention to those, partner up with organizations, make sure you're working together. And part of what they're going to be looking for is good fact patterns. So as you hear stories from your members, if you get good fact patterns, make sure you're sharing that. Again, make sure you're allowed to share it, but get that information out there to whoever's in the lawsuits, getting engaged with it, and being ready to address the media on that. Eviction moratoriums are dangerous for a couple of reasons. One is, I'll give you an example, is Kentucky has one, there's a few other states that have these that are, there's not even a relationship to COVID. It's just, if you can't pay, you can't be evicted. Well, that spreads like an infection, and it spreads faster than COVID does, because quite frankly, people go, so if I don't pay, you can't kick me out? Okay, so I get to stay here for how long? And some of these health emergencies are saying, well, we're going to put it to the end of the year, or we're going to put it till next year, or it's just plain indefinite. So those are things that are being challenged, and I just encourage you to make sure you're involved with those, get involved with the discussion, and make sure you know the details of that. I'll mention this one as well, is masks. We're seeing a surge of COVID infections, some of it's testing, and folks, this is one of those pucker or duck things when you talk about masks, right? I would encourage you just to be careful, but remember one thing. The masks stop the mucus that comes out, okay, which can be riddled with the virus. The real effort, and I want you to remember this is not an airborne virus as much as it is a contact surface. So make sure you're cleaning surfaces, and make sure you're cleaning your own hands and such, and keeping away from your face and eyes. That's really how you block this virus. So a little bit of just hopefully common sense, but keep that in mind. Even as we go into mandates and more masking and all that, make sure you're washing your hands. Don't get distracted with what is kind of being pushed out on folks. Yes, there might be a public good for it. Yes, there is a public good for it, but there's a personal level of making sure that you do the hygiene side of it that is actually the most important. That's a 70% reduction in contagion by just hand washing. So remember that. Finally, I want to touch on two other things here. Right now, as I mentioned, the HEROES Act is in the Senate. It has been stalled. Initially, people thought, oh, early June, this thing's going to fly through. And the Senate said, whoa, in typical check and balance system, the Senate is there to do due diligence when the House reacts to things. So they've done their diligence. They've been hearing from residents, and there is a lot of discussion, and a lot of the debate right now is actually turning on unemployment and how long unemployment and those additional benefits are going to run. In the HEROES Act, it runs through the end of March in 2021. That's a long time. And those of you who are hiring people know that there are a lot of folks who say, you know what? I'm not coming back for $20 an hour or $15 an hour or $25 an hour, because I can sit at home and make $40,000 a year on unemployment. Why would I go work? Unless you want to pay me a little cash on the side maybe, but you know, that's what we're seeing. And so there's some pushback. The numbers are all over in the Senate, from cut it off to maybe we start at 450 and maybe we start backing down. And as the economy picks up. And so we're seeing more of that discussion going on, which leads us to believe that sometime, possibly in the next month or so, this discussion may move forward. Now, the end of July here, those unemployment additional benefits were going to run out. That's when you're going to hear the real screaming start. If it does not go forward, and this is where I want everyone to start thinking in terms of cash flow and how this is going to impact you, is that most people will be able to afford their August rents. When it comes to September rent, some people will have saved money to afford that. But by the time we get to October, if there's not compensation there and our unemployment rates are still at 12, 13, 14%, that could be a real complication. And we could start actually seeing evictions going up. As it is, we've been seeing pretty good occupancy rates, very low eviction filings, except for people who go, you can't get rid of me, so I'm not paying, that limited group of folks. So as you hear things, as you're seeing reactions in your community, if you're seeing reactions, I'll give you an example, a letter that was generated, that was received because they said, the governor said, you can't kick me out, therefore I'm not paying my rent. That's literally what the letter said. So if you get letters like that, if you get things, please send us copies of that. We'd like to see it. It is very helpful for us to get perspective and really keeping a pulse on things. Another thing I want to go back to is on those eviction moratoriums, if you're fighting them at the state level, if this is something we can help with, please remember the tool that we have with Voter Voice. Love to be able to help with that, engage with it. It's one of those processes, it'll take a few days to set up, but you can then use that email link, send it out, and people can email in to their legislators, and it goes directly to the legislator with the letter that you have already prepared. So if you want it modifiable, you can do that. I encourage kind of putting a static letter in place just so it goes and goes forward. But those are the kinds of things that we have available as tools, and I encourage folks to really utilize them if you need them. Contact us, we're here, we want to help on this. If you don't call us, we can't help. So I'll say it that way. But one of the key things about all of this is relationship building. And let me say, going in and complaining to legislators all the time is not always the best way to solve things, right? We want to come in with solutions. One of the things I remember having a city manager make a comment, he said, I hire directors because I want them to bring me solutions. And one of the things we want to do is provide you with a different kind of a solution today, and a solution that may have been kind of one of those things that maybe you've been here is you're thinking of something, but you haven't really articulated it out and said, and you hear somebody say it and you're like, that's what I was thinking about. That thank you. You said what I was been kind of chewing on, but hadn't put it all together yet. And to that end, there's a group I've been working with for a couple of years called Mercatus Institute. They are a think tank. And I'll put it this way, they are deep thinkers and have the time to do some of that. I've asked Salim to come on today to join us on this. He's going to speak to us a little bit on this, on an issue on rezoning and zoning. And those of you who know this issue, you know that, man, that's one of the first things you look at on a house, a property. If you're going to buy it, you're going to rehab, you're going to do something with it. What's the zoning? Is it actually fitting the zoning? Has it been grandfathered? Or is this something, heaven forbid, I want to go down this path of, I need to make a zone change. How many weeks, months, years is this going to take? And so what we want to do is, Salim has put together some documentation, some paperwork, and we'll share this out and have some links in here for you as well on how to get to their website and to get to their documentation on how to reach out to your municipalities to share with them some ways that they can speed up and simplify the process for rezoning. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Salim.
Actually, Charles, I'm going to take it back for just a second to talk about some industry stats that show how important what's coming up actually is.
So hold that thought for a moment, Salim.
So give me just one moment to get into share mode. Whoops. And talk about kind of what we're seeing in the economy and why what's coming up is so important. Just to let you know, most of my numbers come from NAR's July report. If you want to see it on YouTube, it's pretty awesome and just takes about 2 minutes. And it came out for the July report, came out the week of the 4th. And then we are also utilizing Adam's data reports from June and July and NAHB's data as well. So the June jobs report came out on July 2nd. And shows more improvement with more jobs being added and the unemployment rate falling, or at least moving in the right direction. However, there's many more workers looking for jobs than in a normal market. In fact, we're still above the highest unemployment rates, even during the worst recessions that we've seen so far. So the weekly data on insurance claims, sorry guys, my mouse is just not working with me today. The weekly data on insurance claims continues to show job losses at higher than normal levels. So although the market is healing, it's far from what I'm going to call well. Experts testified before Congress last week on the response to the pandemic, and what they said was, although recent economic data offers some really positive signs, the continued challenge will be the need for keeping the virus in check. So now let's turn to the housing data and look at the market recovery index. So it looks like we're on the rebound. The housing market recovery index shows a low point at the end of April with this U here that has us only 10 points from back to baseline. And although 10 points isn't minute by any stretch of the imagination, it's certainly a significant improvement from the 17 where we were from the drop. Now, existing home sales for June aren't scheduled to come out until the 22nd of July, so May is what we have for now. And here's the data that we have. Each of the 4 major regions witnessed dips in month-over-month and year-over-year sales, with the Northwest experiencing the greatest month-over-month drop. Realtors expect that it will represent the bottom, and sales were down 26.6% annually. It's the largest annual decline since 1982, when interest rates were about 18%. So that was before my time, but many of you were investing during that time and know what that pain was like. It's also the slowest pace since October of 2010. Informal data, by basically getting feedback from realtors, showed that they believed by mid-June that buyers were coming back into the market in large amounts and rebound was in sight. And we'll have to just wait to see what the numbers say on the 22nd. We'll get those to you as soon as we have them. So you also have Adam Data Solutions released their news report, and you can see what I've highlighted here with a shaky hand, as you can see, in yellow. But we were looking for what were the most at-risk areas. And those in the second quarter, they sat on the East Coast and in Northern Illinois, with clusters in New York City, Chicago, Baltimore, and DC areas, while the West had the fewest. And the report reveals that a stretch of states running from Connecticut through Florida, plus Illinois, had 43 of the 50 most vulnerable to the economic impact of the pandemic. And this seems to be corroborated by the Realtors data too. The Realtor.com Recovery Index, which tracks how well the US and top 50 housing markets have returned to pre-COVID conditions, found that 12 of the 50 largest markets have surpassed the January recovery baseline, with the greatest recovery you can see here in Boston, San Francisco, Seattle, Denver, and Philadelphia. Several of these markets have seen a good recovery in new listings or sellers, and that's what's driving the overall improvement. And a couple of those markets had devastating losses. If you remember kind of when we were first heading into this, we talked about some of those devastating losses in each of these areas. But it's really encouraging to see them coming strong back to where they were. Adam's data shows that, as you can see, real estate's truly local, and it varies in large degree by class of property, as you can see in the chart for April and May. Now you can also see some of these large metro areas that were hit the hardest. You can see the change in the pricing. And it's really big differences. What I find it kind of interesting and hard to believe is New York City is actually up. You can see here Dallas, who had done really well in terms of pandemic numbers, had been low. That turned around a little bit in June, if you remember, but in May, those numbers were still low, and you could see the pricing reflected that. Houston's outbreak got way worse, but at the time, Texas was in pretty good shape, and that's reflected in the numbers too. So then you can see here that the large metro areas have been hit hard. The South, though, took probably the greatest drop, but still above the other regions. The other regions seem to have been falling off, but it looks like all of that is starting to improve looking at numbers heading into July. You can see pending home sales as we headed into April looked absolutely terrible, but pending home sales with the newest numbers coming out from realtors actually soared. Look at that, 44.3%. And then that taken with mortgage applications, it's down a little bit, but only 2%. So not a large number at all. So taken together, these early stage indicators suggest that home buyers are remaining active in the housing market and will likely measure an improvement in home sales data in the numbers we're going to see on the 22nd as well. So the Realtor.com June housing trends report shows that buyers still outnumber sellers, which is causing the gap in time on market to shrink, prices to go faster than they were pre-COVID, and the number of homes available for sale is decreasing by even more last month. These trends play out in the most recent weekly data, with the time in market being most notable, as homes recently sat on the market for just, can you believe, 7 days longer than last year. The housing market has plenty of buyers who would benefit from a few more sellers, and if the virus can be contained and home prices continue to grow, this might actually help bring sellers back onto the market. And that brings me to the issue that I've been harping about for probably even 6 months pre-COVID, is inventory. As you know, as long as inventory stays low, prices are going to remain high. And existing home sales are one piece of the puzzle, but new home inventory matters too. Housing starts took a dive, if you can see this, pretty incredible dive as we headed into the pandemic. But in a strong signal that the housing market is ready to lead a post-COVID economic recovery, builder confidence in the market for newly built single-family homes jumped 14 points. Look at this. It's an incredible jump to 72 in July, according to the latest National Association of Home Builders and Wells Fargo Housing Market Index. The HMI now stands at a solid pre-pandemic reading in March, before the outbreak affected much of the nation. Builders are seeing strong traffic and interest in new construction, and existing home inventory is still remaining so lean. Moreover, builders in the Northeast and Midwest are benefiting from demand that was sidelined during lockdowns in the spring. So those of you who are in those areas will know what I'm talking about there, because there's just so much pent up demand because of lockdown and the inability to show homes and to buy as easily. So while the housing market is clearly rebounding, challenges exist. Lumber prices are at 2-year highs, and builders are reporting rising costs for other building materials, while lot and skilled labor availability issues persist. And a lot of that housing materials issue is a ability to work in factories and get it out issue. So all of that is still tied basically back to the virus. But the other thing we have to talk about is the important story of the changing geography of housing demand and how that's benefiting new construction. New home demand is improving in lower density markets, as you can imagine, including small metro areas, rural markets, and large metro exurbs, as people seek out larger homes and anticipate more flexibility for telework in the years ahead. Flight to the suburbs is real. Although, as you're going to see in a couple more slides, that's not necessarily true of apartment dwellers. So the other thing that is maybe surprising to you right now, but Charles mentioned it, residential mortgages aren't defaulting in ways that everybody thought that they would yet. So you can see that the foreclosure numbers are still at rock bottom, so far below 2008 and the peak of 2010. And as long as some of these things remain in place, that'll probably remain true. Now, on the rental side, NMHC released their numbers. I was watching them through the 5th because many of us have the grace periods of the 5th, and I was really concerned with what I was seeing, but this is, to me, very encouraging. The NMHC rent tracker shows that year-over-year rent payment numbers are still very strong, but like Charles said, you know, the stimulus money has not run out yet. So I don't think any of us are ready to relax until we see what happens as that all changes. Now, here is what was super surprising for me. So Apartment List just put out their new data, and you can see the URL here if you want to go look at it. But some of the things that really surprised me is, one, renters still really, really want to move. But it's super interesting to me that the urban exodus away from density hasn't been proved out yet. So while the coronavirus's short-term impact on the housing market has already started to materialize in the form of softening rents, which you may have witnessed, the long-term implications for the urban landscape are far from certain, and I think we're going to all continue to hotly debate those until we see how it plays out. So one of the biggest outstanding questions is the degree to which COVID will shift preferences away from cities. And the data is showing subtle regional shifts, as you can kind of see in the map, and we'll look at it in charts in a second, but there's no overwhelming evidence of a large-scale urban exodus. So take a look at this. Google Trends data show that online apartment searching bottomed out in late March before rebounding to pre-pandemic levels through April and early May. This strong rebound is further supported by Apartment List survey, which you're looking at, in which 21% of Americans and 29% of renters said that because of the pandemic, they're now more likely to move during the remainder of 2020. Data shows that they definitely want to change, but not necessarily to a smaller city. We do see a slight uptake in the share of renters wanting to move someplace new. 78% were searching for a different city than where they currently live in Q2, up from 76% in Q1. But similarly, the share of users searching in a different metro rose slightly from 35 to 36%, and the share searching out of state ticked up from 22 to 23%. But if renters are a bit more likely to search in new locations, they're not running away from density, which I was just blown away by. If anything, we're actually seeing a slightly greater appetite for density than we did prior to the pandemic. Now, it's just 4%, but still, I would have thought that number would have absolutely bottomed out. So among users searching beyond their current city in Q2, just over 35% are looking for homes in a city with a higher population density than where they currently live, which is a 4% increase. Despite density's bad reputation, searches to lower density cities have actually ticked down 3% quarter over quarter. Data shows that searches for smaller density cities has declined a bit, while searches for higher density cities, as you can see, has gone up. And here's the thing that I want us to all remember, though, as we look at these data points, is it's, again, real estate is all local. New York, blows my mind, is up still 12%. I just don't get it, but it is what it is. San Francisco has stayed at 0%, so pretty much flat. Chicago and Boston have had major decreases in people that want to get there. So here's what I'm saying, though, as we're looking at all this, please note that these are searches. So they're not fully executed leases. So my question about the data, and we'll have to keep an eye on it as this kind of pans out, is this people looking for greener pastures, but not actually executing on that? They've been cooped up. Maybe they don't have the services in their area during the lockdowns. Maybe their area is on a major lockdown and they don't have Grubhub, or they don't have all these delivery services in their area. And they're hoping that if they get to a higher density area, they'll have more services available to them, or that those areas will open sooner. Who knows? But I think, again, I was just blown away. And then the thing that I wanted to really point out, based on the group that we have on is the commercial apocalypse that we've talked about is really starting to show up in the data. So since February 21st, the numbers, as you can see, have just taken a dive off a cliff. Senior housing is just in really bad shape. Please keep in mind, this is not generally like what Jean talks about, which are small living facilities, but really large living facilities. And I get that. I wouldn't want my loved one in there with 100 other people during a pandemic when they're the most at risk. So that makes perfect sense to me. But you can see student housing, again, that's generally large student housing. I will tell you just anecdotally that my student housing, as soon as UC said that they were going back, we got lots and lots of activity, and we're already leased up. So it's the large student housing, again, that where there's lots of people together that are having challenges. Let me skip over a couple and just say that office really struggling, apartment kind of struggling as well. Where most of REIA members invest, which is single family rentals and self-storage, are doing relatively well, certainly well in comparison to the rest of the pack. But in light of what we're going to talk about here in a second, check out malls and strip centers. They are really suffering, and that has been a trend for them already. Probably not going to turn around after all of this. So keep that in mind as you listen to the upcoming presentation. And you can see in terms of default levels, all just plays out very similar to what you saw in the past slide, in that accommodations is at the highest, unbelievable amounts of default there. You've got retail suffering. You've got the overall is above still the delinquent, well, it's not above, it's right at where the delinquencies were at its height in 2012. You know, we had all of us playing in that commercial space hoped that we'd never see those 2012 numbers again, and here they come. Whereas multifamily, office, and industrial is a little better. And you can see what's contributed to that mostly is all of the major retailers that have really struggled and now are starting to default. And they're leaving so many of these malls in the lurch because as they are anchor stores, as they go, so do most of those facilities. So keep that in mind, as then I'm going to hand back to Charles and let you take it away as we then reintroduce, if you would, please, our presenters from.
All right. So one of the things to mention is, I mentioned the Mercatus Group is actually a think tank, and Salim is going to talk about this. Again, we've mentioned before about fishing in troubled waters, and not that we wish for troubled waters, but there are troubled waters. And so are there opportunities when we look at that much red on the screen that we say, here's a way to do this, but are we going to run into zoning issues? Are we going to run into problems? And is there a solution for that? And with that solution, let me turn it over to Salim this time. Salim, please take it from there.
Thank you so much, Charles. It's great to talk to all of you this afternoon. I hope that you are looking forward to a fun weekend and have some good things planned. Like Charles said, I'm a researcher at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. We're a university-affiliated research center, and I do work on housing economics. So I'm super nerdy. I do have a little bit of experience as a landlord, and so I'm not 100% ignorant of the real life things that all of you face, but I approach this with humility and the sense of I know I have things to learn from you all, and I hope that there's something that you can learn from me. I'm going to really zoom out and maybe sort of put a telescope onto this discussion. Charles and Rebecca have talked about what's happening right now, and obviously that's the most important thing. You've got to think about your August rents upcoming, tenants, vacancies, changes in the law that are going on right now. Very important. I'm going to ask you to look forward and to think about things that might be opportunities, probably not this month, but maybe next summer or the summer after that. And to think about the ways that you can talk in this crisis, which is a crisis. It's a crisis for you. It's a crisis for your tenants. It's a crisis for the restaurant down the street. And because of all those crises, it's also a crisis for your local government. and they are going to listen to you in a way that they wouldn't have a year ago. And people who a year ago would have said, you're not worth my time, everything's running great. Some of them are now going to be willing to listen and say, okay, we're out of equilibrium and we need a new equilibrium. And that's what I'm talking about. Is all my work this year is about flexibility. How do we change the way that we organize local government, the way that local government interacts with space, with property, with people, and put a huge premium on flexibility and try to find an equilibrium that works. We just don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what, if and when we're going to get a vaccine, how good it's going to be, if our grandparents are still going to be at high risk in 5 years, or if we're just going to bounce right back to where we were a year ago, right? We don't know any of that, so we should prepare for potentially big changes. All right, I'm going to share my screen so I can show you pictures because I like picture books. Let me, best way to do this. I am now at the beginning of this presentation, nor is it in presentation mode. There we go. I hope you can all see that. Charles, are you seeing some gorgeous lofts in there? Good. All right, there we go. So if you go to Google Images and you search for industrial lofts, what you will get looks like a interior decorating magazine. They're all stunning. Some of them are obscene, like the one from New York with the bridges. Like, really, who did that? And it's easy to forget that 50 years ago, the word loft did not refer to a residence. It referred to a sweatshop in an old industrial district. And lofts were sort of the oldest form of industry. They were in 1950, 1960, they were the obsolete industrial buildings, which had been built largely before the electric power revolution of the 1920s. Now loft means to us a really fancy residence where pretentious people live. If you go further back, and it's actually really hard on Google Images to find like old pictures from lofts, but like they're skanky. These were really nasty places. Nobody in 1955 thought that these old buildings were going to be statement real estate that very fancy, fashionable people wanted to live in 20, 30, 40 years. And what happened was that first artists, because they needed sort of lots of physical space to do their work, and then others started to illegally take over commercial leases in vacant industrial buildings that were basically useless to industry because their layout didn't work. As industry had modernized, these places didn't work for industry, and the landlords were like, well, anywhere we can get a buck. And so they would rent to artists, and then they started renting to people who just wanted to live downtown and have a short commute. And artists obviously decorate things nicely, so then lofts became kind of a fashion statement, and the rest is history. And now people build from scratch buildings that are intended to look like they were 19th century industrial buildings. Well, that's great. This is fantastic. I love it. And what I want to think about is when you see this, which is probably a lot more familiar in most of your towns than lofts, do you see that kind of opportunity? And what I hope to convince you of today is that decrepit real estate that nobody wants can be an opportunity. And I also want to challenge you, because this type of building has not yet found its métier in conversion. But I want to challenge you as leaders in the industry to think about what you could do with that kind of space if you were allowed flexibility to make it profitable, to make it rateable for the city, right? Pay taxes and be a good citizen, and and contribute to the community that it's around in a positive manner. Hey, Rebecca showed you the slides. I don't need to. So there are lots of conversions from commercial to residential, and as Rebecca said, commercial looks much worse than residential right now. It doesn't probably have the backing of the federal government in the same way going forward. I also think that even if the economy rebounds, it's probably likely that a lot of offices will say, hey, we need to cut costs. The easiest way to do that is to make everybody work from home. And If 10% fewer people go to restaurants to eat, well, that means 10% of the restaurants go out of business and go vacant, right? There's a lot of room, even in a pretty good recovery, for ongoing long-term, commercial vacancies. So I think there's a lot of room, therefore, for conversion of commercial space, either in the structure that it currently is or as a rebuilding, tear it down, rebuild from the ground up. Both of those are viable. So the big projects get press. Here's a few that are from like maybe the last month. But there's also lots of little projects. These are all kind of like, cutesy pictures. Not all of them look this great. The one in the upper left, New Union Garage, that's 2 blocks from where I used to live here in DC. The big middle one is actually in Sweden. The ones on the lower left are in New Orleans, where a lot of corner stores have been converted to residences. So it's certainly not rated into the neighborhood kinds of places and switch them back and forth. They go from residential to commercial, they go from commercial to residential. That's great. We should encourage that level of flexibility, which a lot of places don't allow. But let's come back to what's really familiar to us, right? Most of us live and work in, the middle spaces of America, right? It's not a farm, it's not a big city, it's something in between, whether you're a suburb or a small city. You've got a lot of places that look like this, or that look like maybe a now idle Olive Garden in the middle of a big parking lot. So the challenge to you is, think about how you would use this. And I don't want to belabor that point. Some of you are like, that is not my space. I do not rebuild things. Fine, don't be offended. I don't either. I have no plan for what to do with this decrepit Ames. But someone out there does, and I hope there's some people on this call who don't have any ideas now. In 2 weeks, are going to email Charles and be like, what's that Salem guy's name? I have a great idea for that Ames, and I want to hear from you. All right, here's what stops you from being creative. Now, you can easily,
Let me jump in on one thing real quick. Go
Please.
back to that picture of that Ames building. And something I want to mention to everyone here who looks at rehabbing and does rehabbing, the first thing is, this thing's mostly ADA compliant to start off. Mm-hmm. It's flat, it's easy to walk into, and those are some things, just the cost of that factor in the remodeling is much lower cost than when you look at the factories. So there's a lower threshold for costs on that side of it. And a lot of times what you have is large open space to figure out what you want to do with. So with that in mind, Celine, please go for it.
and harking back to Rebecca's presentation, I hadn't even thought of this before I heard her speak, and she mentioned the lodging industry and how badly they're hit. Well, lodging is the easiest thing to convert because everything already has a bathroom. That's the most expensive aspect of converting to residential. So there's lots of great examples of old motels getting a second life as affordable, naturally occurring affordable housing.
Right.
All right, so why can't you do this, right? If you want to come in, if you have $1 and you want to come in and put another kind of store here, that's going to be very easy, right? The city's going to be thrilled to get the investment, and they'll let you, put in your store in place of the Ames. But generally, the zoning map stops you from putting in residential or anything else you might think of. Maybe a new model of senior center, right? So maybe we need senior living facilities where everyone has their own door to the outside. Maybe that's going to be what's in demand. I don't know. But you can't do that because cities are zoned in so much detail. I went through the zoning map of Arlington, Texas recently. They have zones where you can sell guns but not have a farmer's market, and vice versa. And they have zones where you can have a restaurant but not catering. And you definitely can't have residences in those zones. So this is what I would ask you to do, even if you don't have a great plan for what to do with that Ames. Talk to your local officials and say, hey, we have a commercial real estate problem. These places are probably not going to fill up soon. Amend your zoning code so that residential, multifamily, single family, and manufactured, as it's appropriate, can go into these zones. Because otherwise, a lot of that land is going to sit there vacant. It's not going to pay taxes, and it's going to drag down everything around it for potentially a generation. Those big projects, I showed you those pictures of the nice big shiny ones. Where were they? There we go. they get variances, right? Those are probably planned unit developments. They're done by the big boys who have a whole finance stack with a bunch of partners involved. They're going to go through a discretionary process. But if you're a retail level buyer and you want to snap up some cheap abandoned real estate, you don't want to have to go through that process before you put down a small amount of money. You don't want to have to lawyer up to go through that process to put down a small amount of money to start turning this Ames into something else, right? You want it to be by right. And that's the key distinction. Your city might allow things, might say, oh yeah, come to us with a plan and then we will approve it. But yeah, they might not. They might not like that you're going to turn it into relatively affordable housing in an affluent neighborhood, right? Those neighbors might say, we don't want those people living in this. And so switching it from a discretionary process to a by right process, that's really the key. And that's what unlocks the small dollar investor who doesn't have lawyers and isn't able to hold, $1 million piece of property for 5 years while they go through permissions. That's my talk. We have a little landing page here. I put up the URL, and I'll drop it into the chat as well. So you can read the stuff we've written, which is really, it's geared at policymakers. I'd be thrilled if you share it with your local policymakers. And I'm happy to answer questions, Charles, if you have some, and if others on the call. And, if any of you want to get in touch with me, I love hearing from industry participants about what it's really like out there in the housing world. So feel free to just shoot me an email and say like, hey, heard your talk. You have no idea what it's like for us out here, or I tried to do that once. Here was my experience. Love to hear that from you. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, and Salim, along those lines, this is where we go to kind of back to my earlier comment, folks, where we can complain to local municipalities all we want, but this is the way we can actually bring something helpful and bring a solution to the table. And my expression, if you're not at the table, you're on the table. So let's start by coming to the table with something rather than complaints and saying, please stop, no, which there's definitely a place for that. But if we can bring something to the table as a solution, let's do it. And this is where reach out, download some of their documents, just share it with them. If you got a friendly council member, trustee, alderman, commissioner, share it with them, share it with the city manager, their development groups, say, look, here's some things we like to do. You're locking out small investment that could come in and actually change some of these things, getting them back on the tax rolls. Because I can tell you, having been a council member for 8+ years, and I'll give you a perspective. In our $3 million budget, our initial expectation is a $260,000 shortfall. That was in early April. Right now, everybody's like, we don't know how to even estimate how shortfall we're going to be, how much of a shortfall. So we know there's going to be one. We're probably looking at least 10% shortfall in a budget. Where do we cut? Now, if we can start bringing stuff back online and bring, one of those vacant buildings that I can guarantee you, every local elected official has heard from their constituent about what's going to happen with X. Well, that Ames building that Salim put up there is a perfect example because, folks, we've all got them in communities around us. They're out there. Go to that community, reach out to them, share what Salim's got, and it will help because they can reach out with Salim as well and say, here's some more information, answer questions, kind of talk it through with them. And we can do that as well, and share that information. Salim, while you were talking, there were a number of good comments that were coming in. The first one was pro nerd, so let me just start there. Being a policy, I usually say geek myself, so I tend to go along with support that. But there's a number of ideas that come out. How do you renovate these places and get them moving? And the thing I want to put in everybody's mind is this. Back during the housing recession, a single foreclosure of a house, one residence in a community had a $50,000 impact on the value of the houses around it. Now, if a single family residential has a $50,000 impact, what do you think that Ames structure would have? One of these local, the small shopping malls and such, the impact is massive. Right. And when you start to lay that out to the local community and say, look, we could come in, put this together. I put together a tentative idea. Look, this may not be the Taj Mahal that you want, but this gets it back on the tax roll and gets it going. And let's face it, when it starts moving forward, somebody else may come in and buy me out, and I'm happy to sell at that point.
Right.
So this is about moving things forward and doing development in a positive way. So that's why we reached out to Mercatus, reached out to Salim. I appreciate his thoughts. And let me tell you, he can go very deep and very technical. And I appreciate taking it down to our level for us, bringing it down to that level, because there's some good information here, folks. I really encourage you to reach out, to read it, share it. And even if you don't read through the whole thing, share it with your local municipalities, because this is a way to get it out there and honestly get some of the red tape out of the way, so that us as small developers, and not being the 25, 50, $100 million developer, can come in and really start bringing these properties back online.
Yeah, that's a great point about the contagion, right? Like the negative effects of a vacancy. And this is obviously well documented within a functioning mall or strip center, that vacancies hurt the surrounding businesses, right? So customers aren't coming into the liquor stores, therefore they're not stopping at the TJ Maxx next door, right? Changing the zoning allows, instead of waiting for everything to die before you rebuild variants, it allows you to say, hey, we've got this empty spot. We're going to bring in a non-traditional use because business isn't filling it. And so we're going to do something that's residential there. And then you prevent the vacancy. If it's residential, you're putting customers right on site. You're putting eyes on the street, people who kind of care about the look and feel of the place. And that's really, like, you're only going to get that through zoning change in the text. You're not going to be able to get that through waiting for the whole thing to die and rebuilding with a variance.
And somebody had mentioned in here about, how do you get the funding on it and utilizing different funds. Folks, you start getting into the commercial side, there are commercial tips that are out there, and municipalities can get real flexible and creative to put some funds back into that property to get it developed. And most of the time, there's a lot more demand for it than you might think there is. And there's a lot more openness and willingness to do it. So share this, share it broadly. And with that, we'll take questions, or if there are other thoughts out there. I haven't seen any direct questions come in, but if there's questions or something, happy to take that from there.
As we head into the home stretch too, I just want to mention that depending on how your community is being proactive and how they feel about broken window theory, in terms of how that part of the community affects other parts of the community, they may be a whole lot more proactive. I know even before some of the foreclosures started falling in the now Great Recession, we had some of our members that were incredibly creative, that were working with local governments, and some of them created artist communities. So they took those warehouses and then sectioned them off so that, artists would have facilities to work in. I know that housing is much more appealing, one, for us, and two, sometimes for the community because of other needs that we're having and shortages in housing. So that certainly could be some of the most attractive, but there are plenty of things otherwise that can be done as well. May not be as labor intensive as you get into them. So certainly things to keep in mind. Salim, we're going to share with you some of the ideas out of the chat so that you can take those away. Please make sure that you contact him and share with him your ideas. Let's keep that dialogue going, and let's use the resources that Mercatus has so that we can, as we say, what we're doing is we're in the business of improving our communities one home at a time. And that doesn't have to be a single family home. That can be in many other ways as well. And I think this certainly applies. And the opportunities, as you saw in the slides that I have, if the defaults continue, and considering they're not getting as much support necessarily, I mean, they got some of the funds coming out of the PPP loans in EIDL, but certainly differently than others have in terms of support. Those defaults may not turn around, especially for some of the folks like, unfortunately, JCPenney and Sears may not make it out of this. And if they were anchor stores in places, that could leave a lot of those places really suffering and ready to be taking on a new life as something else. So thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate your time today and the support of Mercatus and the information that you have.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I'd love to revisit it in 6 months and see where we are. Without any other questions, then we will see you then in 30 days, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Have a good weekend.